Now there's audio. Now there's audio. I forgot to press the start the show button. I was so close to having it perfect. Okay, we'll start this again. Hi! Yeah, okay, so this is actually connected to what I was just saying a moment ago, which is I think I fixed the internet thing, but it required that I reconfigure all of the cables here, and I actually need to run the audio and the video as two separate connections in the software, but you don't care about any of that. Anyway, I was able to trace a problem to a piece of the software that was actually handling the live streaming, and so I broke that out, and I'm now streaming off of a dedicated external piece of hardware. And in my tests yesterday, and it looks like right now, I'm able to hold 3 megabits per second, and I actually only need 2.5. So there's actually almost 5 available. So I think it's going to be amazing. In addition to that, I have so much stuff to talk about today. And today's crazy busy because I actually have 2 other live streams that I have to do, like back to back after this one. I'm doing the Rancher office hours for Europe. And then later on today, I'm doing the Rancher office hours for the United States. So I've got to be like, crazy all day. So let's get started. Good morning. Hi, welcome. This is Coffee and Cloud Native, and I'm your host, overly excited, Adrian. Today's August 12th. This is episode 18. If you're new to the show, I spend way too much time every night going through the internet and looking for what happened in the world of cloud native and Kubernetes. I get about 200 things that I filter down to about 10 for the next day's show. And so that's why we're here. If you're watching now or in the future, please click the thumbs up button on the video so that the YouTube algorithm shares it with other people. And yeah, tell your friends. Tell me what you want to see. Tell me, like, I don't know. You got people in the chat. I'm not going to try and read the rest of my script that's going by because literally I have more stuff to talk about today than we probably have time for. We've got to go really fast. Okay. Yesterday, I've got the stuff broken down into like sections today. So we're going to talk about news. Yesterday, MicroK3sup Kubernetes 1.19 release candidate. 1.19 isn't actually out until August 25th, assuming that they hit their target. It's been screwed up because of the whole COVID thing that we're all dealing with. But if you want a sneak peek at 1.19 and start... Ariel's talking like Yoda in the chat. Oh, tons of coffee you need. So if you want to take a peek at 1.19, you can get it from MicroK3sup. Now, I've never actually used MicroK3sup for all the reasons that you all know, because, like, what's the word that, like, fans of a sports team say, like, tried and true or dyed in wool, or there's some phrase. Anyway, I've just never had a reason to look at MicroK3sup, but I hear good things about it. We actually had a fun back and forth at KubeCon, the last one that I was able to physically go to, where they set their SSID for their Wi-Fi point to look like their booth, but it was alphabetical, so I was able to put K3S because K comes before M. Anyway, whatever. They're good guys. Yesterday, HashiCorp dropped 0.13 of Terraform into the land of general availability. 0.13, like back in the day, like GA stuff was, version 1 or version 2 or version 95 or 98 if you were in the Windows camp. And I think it's great that we have software that's, like, we all use alpha level and beta level software, and they're like, don't run this in production, but we need it. And then you've got things that, like, 0.13 basically says this is still under active development, but great, it's GA. They've got some cool stuff in here. For example, there's control flow logic updates for modules. They will now automatically install third-party provider plugins. And my fave is they GA'd custom variable validation. I think this is the best part, because if we're building Terraform, I don't even know what they're called, manifests, plans, whatever, if you're doing Terraform stuff and you ship this out and you've got a custom variable that has an invalid value in it, you don't encounter that until halfway through your provisioning process, you have to roll all of that back. And that stuff takes time and energy and costs money. So the sooner that we can catch errors like this, the better. This is a great feature that they've got in there now. Next up, SonicWall. I like SonicWall. back when I was working with hardware firewalls back in the day, when I was like this big, SonicWall was kind of the underdog. I mean, we had like Checkpoint, we had NetScreen that got bought by Juniper, you had Cisco that had those horrible, horrible things that were so unfriendly. I spent some time last night trying to remember what they were called, and I can't. They were just so awful. I've like blocked them from my memory like a bad relationship. Now, you might think that in the cloud native world, there's no place for hardware firewalls. But remember that the universe that all of us live in, for this cloud computing, virtualization, Kubernetes stuff is actually relatively small compared to the infrastructure in the universe that has existed for decades and will continue to exist. Pix! Pix! That was it! Thank you, Ariel. Oh my god, those things were awful. The ASAs replaced them. They were slightly less than awful, and they're still the current. Yeah, they're the current model. Yes, the Cisco Pix. Oh god, I think it's like reminding me of my ex-girlfriend. I hate you. Um, where was I? Right. So hardware firewalls. SonicWall never ever gave up. There's lots of opportunity still for hardware devices in data centers and branch offices. And what they've done with their new product line, which is the reason it's on the show today, is they basically revamped the whole thing to bring it into a cloud native universe. Um, their firewalls basically run containers, and you can, if you're a data center or a telco or any type of service provider, you can now run different versions, like different release versions of the firewall software, firmware, hardware, software, code base. There we go, code base. You can run different versions with full isolation between them, so you can have entry and exit points for one client running through specific versions of the software that might have features that just that client needs, or enterprise features that they can charge more for, or whatever. Multi-tenancy on the hardware, and then a bunch of other cloud native stuff for, you can run the management platform inside of Kubernetes or containers or whatever. While I don't personally need a hardware firewall, I do actually have a firewall in my house that I run as a virtual machine inside of Proxmox, and that's pfSense, and I love pfSense. It's powerful and it's free when it's not doing things like breaking the internet that it was doing for the last few months. That's not the same thing that I fixed yesterday. There was another pfSense issue. Anyway, this is where I spend my time. I would absolutely love a fully virtualized SonicWall firewall that I could run, as a virtual machine, or even, on some low-end hardware. But they build big firewalls and little firewalls and giant firewalls and red firewalls and blue firewalls. And I'm just glad to see that they're still around. I hadn't actually heard of compute savings plans until yesterday. And I looked at it and I'm like, oh, well, okay. So first of all, let's just talk about what this is. If you're using Fargate or EKS and you're participating in the compute savings plan, you can now save up to 52% on vCPU and memory usage for Fargate workloads that are launched from ECS or EKS. Yeah. So I love that you get this like jittery thing on the left. Somebody broke their CSS. So compute savings plans looks to me like for software. Oh yeah, so they've got another page that talks about it. So they've got compute savings plans and instance savings plans, which I don't know if these are a reboot of like reserved instances or whatever, but basically it's a way that you can get reduced cost per hour for your workloads by pre-committing to a minimum number of hours over a 1-year or 3-year term. I would like to know if anybody's actually using this, anybody who's watching the show. Because when I look at this, remember that Amazon's not doing anything that's not good for them. So one, if they can offer you savings of up to 66%, that means that everybody who's paying for on-demand is paying too much. So definitely you want to get your stuff on reserved instances or whatever this thing is here. Thing number 2, this looks to me a lot like going to Vegas and gambling. Amazon is the house. Amazon is betting that you can't accurately predict your usage and forecast it into the future, which means you will do one of two things. You will either overcommit and end up paying for compute time that you don't use, or you will undercommit and you will have to pay on-demand pricing anyway. It's a game. It's a gamble. It's still valuable and you should still try to figure it out. But I think compute savings plans are even more of a gamble than reserved instances. Reserved instances are fine. I'm going to have a machine. It's going to be on 24 hours a day for the next 3 years. I'm going to pay less. Done. But this, well, let me know in the comments or the chat if you're actually using it. Trick says the house always wins. Yes, this is Amazon benefits from this. You might also benefit a little bit, but I'm betting across the entire customer base, Amazon makes money off of this. Do you know that credit card companies make some ridiculous amount of revenue from late fees? Something like 85% of the money that they make is from late fees. It has nothing to do with compute savings plans, but it's kind of the same thing. Like you look at, well, I look at this and, well, whatever. I'm going to move on. I'm going to start rambling about credit card companies and stuff like that. Oh, yeah. Okay. K3sup. Alex launched K3sup SWAG yesterday. And I got to say, personally, I'm a fan of the red on red. I think that's great. But I really like the vintage K3sup bottle. Is that not awesome? This stuff is limited edition. Basically means there's a run of a certain number, and it's not limited edition like, collect them all. But when they're gone, they're gone. Maybe. Or maybe it's just to introduce the idea of scarcity so that we all run out and buy it today. But you know what? Who cares? Because Alex makes good software. OpenFast, Inlets, Arcade, K3sup. The dude spends time and energy to make really, really, really useful open source amazing code that we all use. So I wanted to buy this. We're talking about it yesterday. I wanted to get a t-shirt, but Chile's borders are still closed. So I don't even know. Like, I have one way to get stuff into the country, which is really expensive, and they're really terrible at it. But standard mail type stuff, it just doesn't make it in. My wife had a package that sat in Chicago in a U.S. Postal Service office for months, and then they just shipped it back to the sender and said, we have no way to get this to Chile. So hopefully he'll set one of these aside for me so that I can buy it later. But for the rest of you who live, I don't know, I think these ship from UK because they're priced in pounds. But whatever, go buy, go support Alex. He does good for us. Moving on to tools and stuff. So we're out of the news section, we're into the tools section. What do you do when you have a brand spanking new GA release of Terraform? Well, you use it. But if you really want to just get your hands dirty, your feet wet, if you want to dive in, Mingfang created or updated the Terraform provider for Kubernetes. This supports all Kubernetes resources, enables management of them from Terraform, and even though 0.13 dropped yesterday, boom, he dropped this as well. Full support for 0.13. You can install the plugin from inside automatically using that feature. And he's got a whole bunch of documentation here about how to define Kubernetes resources so that you can create and manage them from Terraform itself. This does something else that's neat, where you can actually run it against an existing Kubernetes cluster, and it will extract the resources from the cluster and either save them out to individual files, or it can load them into Terraform for their current state. So if you wanted to get into Terraform, but you were like, oh, I already have a cluster and I don't want to recreate all of that stuff from scratch, well, now you don't have to. You can just pull the stuff out and then flip it around and start managing it from within Terraform. I sent tweets out after the show for all of these things. I could not find any way to reference this guy, so I'm just going to mention HashiCorp. But if any of you know him or anything, if you could just, tell him I said, what's up? Okay, hang on. I gotta come off the camera for this one. So yesterday I was talking about how the manifest scoring utilities and all the best practices stuff say to use an imagePullPolicy of always, and how I don't do that. I use imagePullPolicy if not present. But I couldn't remember exactly why until last night. A big part of why I don't do that is if you have an imagePullPolicy of always, and the registry is down or unreachable for any reason, new pods will not start even if a copy of the image is on the local machine. So that's bad. And I even tested this again last night to make sure that was still the case, and discovered two things. One, yes, that's absolutely still the case. And two, if you do kubectl create, the manifest that kubectl creates for you has an image pull policy of if not present. So this came up because I found this tweet from Stefan Prodan, who works for Weave, where he was responding to a GitHub outage report. I don't have that report open, but apparently this actually happened to GitHub and caused a major outage. They'd done a DNS change, a bunch of stuff got rescheduled, it couldn't find their internal registry server, and so cascading failure across all of GitHub. In this tweet, people are like, oh, but the best practices and the CIS benchmarks, they say this and they say that. There's an actual thing that was introduced by Malcolm Gladwell, that is called, what's it called? Cockpit culture. Cockpit culture is a phenomenon where he did research into a plane crash, or multiple plane crashes, I don't know. But pilots were making the wrong decision, and other people knew that it was the wrong decision, but didn't say anything because the pilot was in a position of authority. And this is not just unique to pilots. This is unique to anybody who's in a position of authority. We've all been in a situation where we knew that person was wrong, but we didn't say anything because they're in a position of authority. Maybe we're wrong, we don't know, and then it went sideways and, whatever. I wonder if we're looking at these best practices scoring utilities or the CIS benchmarks or whatever and falling into cockpit culture where we're letting other people decide what's best in lieu of critical thinking. So I just want to throw that out there and say I'm not the only person who thinks this is bad. I'm not going to go ahead and switch over to this, even if it says in a bunch of places. Here's the thing about the internet. Somebody writes something, and then somebody else copies it, and then somebody else copies it, and then somebody else copies it, and pretty soon you see the same thing in a bunch of places, and because of the limited functionality of our human brains, we believe that that validates the truth of the information, and it doesn't. It's just people copy stuff. So think for yourself, test your stuff, don't be like GitHub. Well, do be like GitHub, but don't make those same mistakes. Pause for a moment here and check the chat, which is just scrolling by. So good morning, everybody. I don't have time to call out everybody's name today because we got to burn through a bunch of stuff. I wasn't familiar with Cisco Ironport. Must have been a precursor. Oh, somebody's retweeting my stuff. Okay, so Justin says another good reason to use if not present is to ensure that your teams adopt immutable and hermetic image builds. That's actually what this guy talks about in his post. Obviously, he's from Weave. Weave are the people who are behind GitOps, and he's in favor of that. So yes, immutable images and static references to the image. The thread's kind of interesting. You can see people on both sides of the fence. But yeah, that's another reason to do it. Whether you use the direct hash, you want to make sure that it's idempotent, that you're always going to get the same thing, and that it's always going to behave the same way. Trick says always policy can also be bad if the repository is compromised. Somebody brings that up. They say if you're using always, actually they're saying if you're using if not present, somebody could own the machine and replace the image locally, and then it could get loaded into the thing. And I think that's a pretty weak excuse, because if somebody's already on your machine enough that they can replace the Docker or whatever, the container image locally on the machine, you have huge problems. You're not going to save the world by having an image pull policy of always. Okay, moving on. A potpourri of service mesh for you. Service mesh is hot. We know that. We talk about it here. People love it. People hate it. It's amazing. It's terrible. Microsoft is wonderful. Google is evil. Istio is blah. It all comes down to the fact that service mesh is hot. But then there are people who look at service mesh and they're like, what? What? I just learned about Kubernetes. Why do I have to learn about all this other stuff to sit on top of it? This article is for those people. It's a little breakdown of the value and architecture of 9 different service meshes. And this is just 9 of the ones that are out there. He picked the big ones, Istio and Linkerd and stuff like that. And then he scrolls down. Well, I scroll down. Mesh, yay. Okay, anybody ever heard of this? Service Comb Mesher. I've never heard of this. It's from the Apache Software Foundation, and it's a high-performance service mesh implementation written in Go. Mesher. No idea. Did you know that there's a service mesh specifically for telcos and service providers? I didn't. Huh, but there is. So, it's only going to get crazier. And if you are at all concerned about making the wrong decision, being stuck with something that isn't doing what you want, having to settle for fewer features than what you really need, then I recommend that you look at Service Mesh Hub from Solo. Talked about this before. I'm not going to flog the dead horse today. This will give you flexibility and openness and the ability to move and the ability to use the service mesh that's right for the environment that you're going into. And you can just rise above all of this, like, hand-to-hand combat that's going on for whose service mesh is the best service mesh and so on and so forth. It's a good article, though, if you know nothing about service mesh, talking about which ones are which and why they made the architectural decisions that they did. We're going to run out of time. Well, actually, I guess it doesn't suck because I can punt half of this to tomorrow, and that's less work that I have to do tonight. Okay. Aurelie is super cool. She started this back in April, and she's created a series of intro to Kubernetes resources that are done visually. Calls them, what does she call them? Sketch notes. There we go. She has 36 of them done so far, and they're absolutely adorable. So some people learn by reading. I've actually learned that I retain information if I hear it. So if I need to remember a 2FA code or something like that, I'll actually say it out loud so that I can retain it in the time that it takes to go to type it in somewhere else. And some people learn visually. So if you or someone that you know is learning Kubernetes and is struggling with the concepts, send them here. And maybe it'll make more sense when they can actually see the relationships between the various things. And they're just adorable. She just keeps cranking these things out. Oh. 3. Okay. I sadly am going to have to skip all of the rest of this and go straight to the tool of the day. So you have to come back tomorrow to see the evolution of Kubernetes worker nodes with Cryo. And what else do we got going on? We got HIPAA compliance and some other stuff. But let's go to the tool of the day. Tool of the day. Tool of the day. Termux. Termux is an SSH utility that runs on Android, but that's not actually true. So I don't use Android. I'm firmly established in the Apple camp over here. But I do use a similar tool for iOS called Prompt. But all it is actually an SSH client. This is not an SSH client, and it's not even a shell. You don't have to root your device. It's like a micro Linux environment that runs as an app on your phone. So there's a library of other apps that you can install into it. There's even a kubectl app. So you can, from your phone, connect via kubectl. You don't have to SSH into something and then kubectl. You can connect directly from your device, from inside this app, to your clusters and do management and stuff. For all the times that you're out there and you're like, I need to, kill that pod or whatever, which honestly, it happens to all of us. So you can write your own packages for it, and they can be as simple as a shell script. You don't have to have any programming knowledge of Android or, probably nothing other than basic Bash programming experience in general. So this is out there. I don't know what it costs. I'll have their page actually linked. You can go to termux.com. It looks, wow, that's really, really, really tiny font. I don't think you want to be doing all your management from your Android device, but when you need to do it, having a tool in your pocket that allows you to do it is great. It's great. It's like backups. It doesn't matter how much you pay for a backup solution. The first time you recover from it, it paid for itself. Or high availability. You got that standby node that's sitting there for a year doing nothing. You're like, oh, why do we pay for this thing? And then the master node crashes and the whole site fails over and people continue buying stuff. and you get a pat on the back from your boss, and you're like, well, good job. Yay me. We have a couple minutes left. Let's check the chat. Dun. All right. Tej says, always means you are welcoming new things and it will give you some surprises. Always, when combined with an image tag of latest, I actually responded to his tweet, and I described it as appicide. Like, your app will die. Bad things will happen. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but I guarantee it's going to happen at a time when you don't have Termux on your phone. And I've noticed throughout my career that problems tend to, like, individual problems are easy to mitigate, but the big problems are never just one big problem. It's a perfect storm of multiple little things that come together to create a large failure. And any one of those little things, had they been corrected along the way, would have prevented this larger thing from happening. There is no problem too small that we shouldn't fix it permanently. Remember, I had a managed services provider for years, and my clients would often prefer a less expensive solution that just patched a problem than a more expensive solution that fixed the root cause for it. And I always had to explain to my staff that if you have a production environment and you put a temporary solution in, the solution that you just put in is actually permanent. 100% of the time, you say, I'm just going to do this, I'll come back and fix it later. You won't. Something else will take your attention, and that will fall off the list because it's no longer a priority. So spend the extra time to fix things permanently. Put a workaround in place, but don't go do something else. Do the root cause analysis, fix the root cause, and you will or reduce the likelihood of that perfect storm of massive failures ruining your day or your life or your career or whatever. Wojtek says that he's using Termux and it's cool. He's used it for some time and loves it. That's awesome. Devin asks, are service meshes worth using if your company doesn't do microservices? People I work with think microservices are a deployment strategy and not an app design architecture. Yes, they are still. They provide great benefits for microservices, but if you just have individual containers running applications, service mesh still can provide significant value for things like circuit breaking or canary deployments when you do updates of the app, failing some of the traffic over to it, doing blue-green deployments at the network communication level instead of inside the load balancer. There are still tons of benefits. I think that where we're going is that all Kubernetes clusters will have a service mesh of some kind. And I wouldn't be surprised if some basic service mesh functionality rolled itself back into, I guess it couldn't really roll back into Kubernetes directly because the whole CNI layer is managed outside of that. But I think they're going to become more prevalent. I think you're just going to have a cluster and you're going to pick a service mesh, and that's what you're going to do. Trick says Termux is free. Oh, Wojtek says Termux is free. Go install it if you use Android. And Trick says there are no temporary fixes, and that is absolutely correct. So that is all we have for today. I will have lots more stuff for you tomorrow. I even punted about 8 things that didn't make the list for today to tomorrow, so that's in addition to the ones that I just bounced. So tomorrow's going to be another great show. Please come back and join me for it. So I will post all the links in the video description and the Git repo as soon as the show ends, actually about 30 minutes after the show ends. If you follow me on Twitter, you get a notification when that happens. If you have something you'd like me to consider for the show, hit me up and let me know. My contact details are in the video description, or you can tweet with the CNCN hashtag and I will pick it up. If I mentioned a tool that you use, like Termux, let me know in the comments. And if you liked what you saw today, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, click the bell, you get notifications when the next show starts. I'll be here every weekday as long as there's something to talk about, and there is apparently, as I keep reminding myself, tons of stuff to talk about. Have a great day. Maybe I'll see you in office hours later. If not, I will see you tomorrow. Keep learning. I will see you the next show.